right. Good morning. It is now 11:02, and we are getting ready to go live both on our YouTube as well as Periscope. So we are setting up here, and if you give me just 1 second, we should be ready. All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, 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 good morning, everyone. I know it's going to take a moment for people to get back used to me coming back in on 11 a.m., but I am back. I am back. I am back. I am back. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Daring Dialogues, where I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that everybody has been having a great and wonderful morning. Today is Thinking Thursday, and my oh my, we have a lot to talk about. Hopefully, good morning, love. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Hopefully, we will get into reading at least one of our books today. But I do realize and recognize that while I have been off air, lots of things have been happening in our nation, and so I've actually been charting some of the things that have been happening in our nation, and I'm going to talk about them very briefly, and then we're going to move into our regular time of reading today. We'll be reading, hopefully, from The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and also How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. Those are our Thursday reads for right now that we are currently working through. All right. So if you have been following us on Thinking Thursdays, you know that this has been our reading material where we've been reading aloud from. All right. So we're going to get right cracking into what has been happening. It seems like I went offline for a week to give myself some time to take care of some personal things with my home. And it looks like America has just gone off the hinges in some ways. Does it seem that way to you all? Or do you think that this is just normalized America? Like some people say this is the worst it's ever been in any time in their lifetime. And some people say it hasn't gotten worse, it's just gotten televised, it's just gotten videotaped, it's just gotten more media attention, right? So I would say for people who have maybe lived previous, who were born maybe in the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, might tell you that America really hasn't gotten worse, it's just gotten televised. Whereas people who have been born after 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all right, into 2000s, all right, because a person born in 2000 would now be an adult, or legally an adult, they would probably tell you they've never seen anything like this in their lifetime. So it depends really on what generation you're talking to, that you might get a difference of opinion as to whether or not we are really in the worst of times. But let me just tell you, in case you don't know, because I'm finding out, even though I was offline, we do have a Facebook page, Daring Dialogues, where we do continue to share news. So if I'm ever offline, you can always go to the Daring Dialogues Facebook page and you'll see that I'm still sharing news and articles there. What I am finding out is that everybody is not being made aware or kept abreast of what is happening in our country. And depending on, a lot of people may not understand how the internet works. So, depending on what kind of subjects that you like, okay, what kind of subjects that you see all the time, what kind of subjects you click on, the internet forms algorithms around the kinds of things that you like. All right. So, for example, if you're not looking at news across the nation concerning police brutality or Black Lives Matter, you're probably, your news for your Google feeds and your other internet is probably not set up for algorithms to show you that kind of news. All right. So unless you're really checking for it, those kinds of news articles may not ever run across your news feed, which is why, part of what I do with Daring Dialogues is I try to let people know and alert people as to what is happening nationwide around these issues, because everybody is not getting this news. All right. Unless you are a regular watcher of something like MSNBC or CNN, or unfortunately, hopefully not Fox News, because Fox is actually an entertainment channel. It's actually not real. That's actually not real news. But Fox is a entertainment channel. And so you want to make sure you are picking up news from an actual news site, with real journalists, that you're actually reading newspapers, from legitimate known sources, right? And they may not give you all of the news, but at least you will know some of the major things that are happening across the country. Also, if you look at C-SPAN, if you're going to watch television, C-SPAN is a good channel to look at, because it kind of gives you some of the things happening in our government. When there's hearings going on, people don't pay attention to C-SPAN, but if you have television, you probably should be paying attention to that channel. All right. So the last week, this is just things that have happened from last week, what, Wednesday? Last week, Wednesday, up until yesterday. I just want you to think about this, okay? We've had bombing packages. I think the number is now up to 13 or 14, because the gentleman, we prayed that he would be captured because people were acting like they couldn't figure out where he was. We prayed that he would be captured, and in less than 24 hours, he was captured and brought into custody. He is now being held continually in custody because of the amount of data that they have found in his possession of all different kinds of government officials, celebrities, anybody who had something against, or he felt they had something against President Trump. All right. And he is being kept and held in custody, and they are now finding more packages. They're still finding packages. And what they have found out is that the material inside of the packages is actual real explosive material. Even though it didn't go off, the reality is it was real explosive material. Like, he wasn't faking what he put inside of the pipe bombs. All right. The second thing that happened that many people did not hear about was the shooting in the Kroger in Louisville, Kentucky, of two elderly Black people. And that particular shooter, both of these shooters, by the way, are white supremacists. That particular shooter, was trying to get into a church first, but the church was locked. So he could not get into a church. So he went to the next place that he thought he could find that was unsecured and open. Now, some grocery stores actually do have security guards. Apparently, this Kroger did not. So he went into this grocery store and shot and killed two elderly African Americans, female, male. When he was leaving out, now I'm going to talk about this for a next second. I'm going to come back to the bombing package person. But when he was leaving out, another white male approached him, saw what he had done, and the other white male approached him, and he was carrying a gun as well. Now, because it was an active shooting situation, he very well could have shot him to wound him, but he didn't. And when they interviewed that white male who was confronted by him, he told him that white people don't shoot white people. This is one of my concerns about so-called white allies, because when you are put in a position to actually help the community from further harm, what do? Do you freeze up like this man? He had a gun. He could have stopped him, but he didn't. All right? Because that white shooter put him on code and said, white people don't kill white people or don't shoot white people. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Let's go back real quick to the bombing packages. I did watch an interview of the employer of the bombing package man. All right. Caesar Sayok, I think his name was. I try not to talk too much, but give their names. He was hired by a white female owner of a store or something. And in her interview, she admitted several things. She admitted that she was LGBTQ, part of the LGBTQ community. She hired him knowing that how he felt about the LGBTQ community. Good morning, Running for Zion. She hired him knowing how he felt about Jewish people. She hired him knowing how he felt about Black people. In my personal opinion, she too is part of the problem, because he would say things to her and around her that let her know that this is a person that you should not have, because I think he was like delivering packages or something. This was a person that could potentially pose a danger to the customers that you're trying to serve, because he was very open and honest with his employer about how he felt about all of these marginalized people groups, and she gave him a job. She still hired him. And so to me, she is a part of the problem. Because she knew he was saying all of these things. She knew he had these potentially threatening kinds of ideas about other people groups, but she never reported him. All right? She never reported him, and she gave him an economic base by hiring him so he could have time to get addresses and things, so he could have time to buy up all the supplies that he needed. She actually helped to fund that in a way, okay? Maybe not directly, but she hired him. She knew what he stood for. He even told her and made threatening remarks to her about the LGBTQ community that she was a part of. She didn't even protect her own community. All right? And so I look at those two incidences where I always say, when these things go down, you cannot tell me there's not somebody around these people, these suspected white supremacists, who know what they are about. And your silence is dangerous to people who don't know what's going on. Your silence and saying, oh, I knew this person was evil. I knew what they thought about X, Y, and Z, but I didn't tell anybody. Same thing with Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof had people around him that knew what he was planning to do. And then people say, well, I knew he had this plan, but I didn't think he would carry it out. Hello? What part of call the FBI don't you understand? Like when there is real threat and when there is imminent danger, that's not the time to be talking about, should I or shouldn't I? No, yes. Err on the side of caution, okay? Same with the MSD shooting. What's MSD? You have to give me the full wording on that. Err on the side of caution, people. Call 911. That's the time you need to be calling 911. Not when people are barbecuing, not when people are selling lemonade on the sidewalk. All right? Utilize 911 when we actually need to utilize it. How about that? Okay? You got a neighbor, you know they're white supremacists, you know they hate black people, you know they hate Ashkenazi Jews. You know this. And Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Florida. Thank you. Okay. Yes. You know this and you're not reporting. And then when you see the tragedy unfold, then you want to have the nerve to come on TV and get an interview talking about, well, I saw this and I saw that. And I saw this and I saw that. And after you give that interview, they need to have some handcuffs waiting on you. That's the really way I feel about it. Because some of this stuff could be prevented. Okay? Right after you get off air, they need to have a officer waiting for you in the corner with some handcuffs to bring you into questioning to see if you possibly could have been an accomplice. Because this is getting to be ridiculous. You mean to tell me all these people committing these things and nobody around them knows what's going on? Yeah, they know what's going on. They're not reporting what they should report. All right, what's that saying? If you see something, say something. Okay? The other one that has happened within the past week, the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania temple shooting. Got a chance to look at a piece of that report of, I believe, one of the people who gives oversight at the temple. He said normally they do have armed security at the temple, except for the one day that they don't have it, that they should have had it, which is on the Sabbath. Okay, so they didn't have armed security that day. I think it was a some kind of ceremony thing that was happening, somebody's child or something, right? Person walks in, 11 people dead, 5 people wounded. Had some conversations over the past weekend with people saying, have you heard about Pennsylvania? Have you heard about the Pennsylvania temple shooting? And I say, yes, it was absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. It got plenty of press. But did you hear about the 2 black people who were killed the day before at the Kroger in Louisville, Kentucky? Oh, no, I didn't hear about that. Really? That happened? When did that happen? Oh, it happened before the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania temple shooting, which unfortunately goes back again to the media bias when it comes to reporting about things happening to us that is a hate crime. And it took them a while to figure out whether or not they want to charge that shooter with a hate crime. But in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania temple shooting, that man was charged with a hate crime within hours. And I think he's now been brought up on 44 counts of hate crimes. And he could face, I think in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they said he could possibly face the death penalty. Oh, because you're going to die. You possibly are going to face the death penalty if you kill them. Okay? This is where we are, people. Something else you may not have heard of that has happened it hasn't happened within the last week, but it has finally gotten to the news because there has been a media blackout with this particular case, and now black media is picking it up, which means that mainstream media is not going to be far behind because now they're going to see the traction that story is getting, and so it'll hop onto mainstream media. A Ferguson activist, a mother of, I believe, 2 sons, woke up opened her back door and found her son hanging from a tree in their backyard. Now, I have seen the images, and the images are graphic. If you want to read about that particular story that shows the images, that is on news1.com, which I believe is under Roland Martin. But before Roland Martin, there were other people who were just sharing it on Facebook, and Facebook kept taking the story down and kept taking the pictures down. So then other independent black media picked up the story and began reporting on it through YouTube. And then News One picked up the story, and now you'll probably see it finally make it to mainstream media, but it happened October 17th. The mother believes that this murder of her son in this style was a retaliation against her for the activism work that she does in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, if you've been following what has happened in Ferguson, there have been several murders, mysterious murders of the Ferguson activists, the ones who were actually on the ground, not the ones who wound up getting publicity for being there, who didn't live there, who wound up doing tours and getting paid and doing interviews. No, the real Ferguson activists who were on the ground during that time, many of them have been murdered mysteriously. Some of them have been shot to death, left in cars, and the cars set on fire. That kind of stuff is happening in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, I know a lot of people who live in Missouri who are activists, so I'm always praying for them, because we don't need any more activists being murdered mysteriously in Missouri. All right? And so the police ruled his death as a suicide. The mother is contesting this because you can even look at the pictures and know that he didn't hang himself. Okay? They didn't even try to examine whether or not it was a homicide. They just automatically ruled it as a suicide. So the mother is trying to petition to get the case reopened as a homicide. His feet were bound, and then he was lynched. You don't hang yourself with bound feet. All right, so there's a lot of suspicious things going on around that, but we do need to be aware. On my Daring Dialogues page again, I have given, if you type in Daring Dialogues through your Facebook search engine, Daring Dialogues Black Family, you will find the post. It will come up where I have given several things that Black families need to do in order to protect themselves in a country that is not doing a very good job at protecting us. All right? So I have given some helpful warnings and tips that you can take a look at in order to be aware and pay attention. The other thing that has happened this past week, the Proud Boys Facebook pages, groups have been finally removed from Facebook. I reported them September 15th to Facebook. I reported probably about 40 of their pages, and I received a notice from Facebook saying that none of their pages were in violation of Facebook code and policy. I immediately said to myself, this is not going to turn out well for Facebook, because they keep letting these people have these pages freely, openly talking about things that they want to do to other people. They are a known hate group. They were classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Sure enough, October 15th, Proud Boys is in the news for the beating that happened in, I believe it was New York. And now here it is, yesterday, Facebook finally removes all of the Proud Boys pages, saying and painting themselves as advocates for free speech, but definitely against hate speech, and how Proud Boys goes against their hate speech policies. And I said, you know what? That is a lie, because Facebook was told about these pages and they chose to keep them up. And I have the receipts that show that Facebook said that Proud Boys does not violate their policies. So Facebook, nice try, but you lied. Okay? You lied. Don't try to come to the rescue now, acting like you are so involved in keeping this kind of stuff off of your platform. Because I know you're not, because I reported them and you told me that they didn't violate your policies. Now, all of a sudden, you're being quoted in Business Insider as saying, oh, we would never tolerate these sorts of things, when in fact you do. All right? So I call that a lie. But anyway, the good news is they have been removed. They are still on Twitter, but they are no longer, their pages are no longer on Facebook, taking down about 20, I think they said 20,000 members of the Proud Boys pages are now trying to regroup and trying to figure out what they're going to do next. But that could have been prevented had they just listened September 15th, and probably even before that. I'm sure other people have reported them. All right. Another thing that has happened, a woman was recently arrested, and I really believe the only reason why this particular white supremacist female was arrested was because she wrote a note to a white family and left it on their door. She wrote a note to them, a white family, stating that they have basically ruined her neighborhood because she purposefully moved to an all-white town to live in an all-white neighborhood. And the fact that this particular white family had a black child now ruined her neighborhood experience. And she basically said, I moved here so I wouldn't have to see any black people. And you should have thought of that before you moved into this neighborhood. You should have considered your neighbors. It's been all white. And we want you to know that your black child is not welcome here. That's what she wrote in the note to the white family. Needless to say, she was arrested, picked up, and I believe she is going to be charged with, I think, criminal stalking or something like that. All right. Again, all of this has happened within the last week. People are becoming more and more bolder with their notion of superiority and dominance over other people, and with their desire to try to lord over people or to try to inflict some sort of terror. What else has happened in the last week? In the last week, Megyn Kelly has been fired from her job for her stance on blackface and trying to paint blackface and the concept of blackface as something that was normal if it was done properly. Well, Megyn Kelly saw very quickly that that was not going to fly. People did not receive her apology for that, and so she was fired. Don't worry, with a possibly $60-something million payout, she'll be on to probably creating her own page or own network where she can spew all of her slightly underhandedly racist views. So don't worry, Megyn Kelly is going to be all right because she is white and female in America, and she will land on her feet. Yeah, she will. What else has happened this week? Halloween. More people are taking it upon themselves to use Halloween as an opportunity to do blackface. I have seen two recently. A teacher dressed as, I think, LaWanda or Wanda from Napoleon Dynamite. She has been fired. And then another couple dressing up as complete blackface, Beyonce and Jay-Z. She has been fired. I don't think the male has been identified yet. Again, I don't know why people haven't gotten the memo yet that doing racist things will get you fired, but somebody needs to pass out this memo to our fellow white brethren and sisterin. Doing racist things will get you fired. America is at a point where people have zero tolerance for feigned ignorance. Okay? So, those are a couple of things that has happened. In terms of Halloween, there was a person that was caught, I think, the day before, who was trying to He had gone online and he was seeking someone to sell him a child so that he could perform sexual acts on the child, kill the child, and eat the child. We have some very sick people out here in the world. And so when people talk about Halloween and all of the occult rituals around it, some people say it's not a big deal. Some people say you all are too serious about it. Some people say it's just a time for people to dress up with costumes. And some of that may be true. But here's the reality: it is an occult ritualistic holiday that Satanists practice and participate in, and they look for children. All right? This particular guy happened to be caught. A police officer, I believe, ran across his post, started engaging him in conversation, and set up a meeting point. When they got there, the man had all of his materials ready for what he planned to do to a child that thankfully never showed up, but the officer did, and he was arrested and taken into custody. So this particular person was caught. But there are so many others that are just like him that were not caught. All right. So when people tell you, be mindful of what you're engaging your children in, pay attention to your children, watch your children, don't leave your children unattended, sight, sound supervision. This is something they teach you in school if you're an educator. Sight, sound supervision. Is your child in your eyesight? Can you hear your child? Keep up with your children, people. All right? And not just on Halloween. I have to say this, not just on Halloween, but please keep up with your children. There's too many times this is just a small sidebar. There's too many times I'm in a store and I'm seeing the parents way back there and I'm seeing their children way over here somewhere playing in something unattended. And I'm just like, do we not understand that we live in a society where people will snatch your children and you'll never see them again? Are we not understanding this, or do we just not care if somebody snatch our child up? I just want to know. So please keep up with your children, especially small children, 5 years and under. Okay? Make sure you're holding your child's hand. Make sure they're not too far ahead of you. So if something does happen, you're not having to chase the person down. All right? Keep up with your children. Hashtag keep up with your children. I wonder sometimes too, Lady Barbara. I'm wondering, what are people thinking? This is, I don't understand. All right. Lastly, I think I've covered almost everything on here. Lastly, number 45 gets up, does an interview, and he has said this several times since he first said it, about wanting to, by executive order, deal with the birthright citizenship part of the 14th Amendment. People are saying, oh, this is absolutely impossible for him to do this. He cannot do this by executive order. It's not, he would need Congress and Senate and all of that. People said it was absolutely ridiculous or impossible for him to be president. But yet, look where we are. Look where we are, people. Look at where we are. So I need people to stop saying, it's ridiculous. It's impossible. It couldn't possibly happen. Listen, with the people that we have in office running this country, with all three arms of government right now being under the control of radical right-wing politics, anything is possible. Let's be clear. Dictators and totalitarianism does not happen because people are following the rule of law. Okay? Hitler did not come to power because people were following the rule of law. You may be thinking like a law-abiding citizen, But I can tell you right now that there are people who are in power right now who are not thinking about law abiding. They're thinking about how they can secure their future and the future of their seed in this country by any means necessary. That's what they're thinking about. All right. So when someone says that Trump can't possibly do this by executive order, and that if he does enact an executive order, we'll understand what would happen. The same thing that happened with the Muslim ban, the same thing that happened with the first influx of migrants, right? He enacted some things by executive order that then had to be fought in the courts, that then had to be overturned. And in the process of that, guess what happens? Time goes by. And until that time goes by and the issue is resolved, all kinds of disastrous things can happen within that time frame. So he might enact it, and then they now have to go through a process to say, they now have to go through a legal process or the red tape of overturning what he enacted. And in that time frame, lots of disastrous things can occur. So it's not just the issue of whether he has the legal right to do it. The reality is if he does it, it's going to put things into play, all right? Just like it did with all of those children being separated from their parents who are still separated from their parents. Even though it's been ruled unconstitutional. It was ruled that he could not do that and that they had to now reunite those children with parents. Well, guess what? They used that time to separate those parents and children so far from each other that now it's hard to put them back together. Now they're still trying to find the parents of the children and the children of the parents. So just because we say somebody can't do it, the reality is if he does use that executive power, he can put things into motion that, yes, they may be overturned, but in the meantime, it's going to do damage. So we don't want him doing that. All right. And then on top of that, not only did he propose this, but then Senator Lindsey Graham had the nerve to come behind him and say, I'm going to introduce legislation to back the madness. And that's where it gets real. Because at first, people were saying, well, if he tries this with an executive order, it can be overturned because he can't do that with an executive order. But if someone introduces legislation, oh, now you got a problem. Now you have a problem. And then people are saying, well, even if the legislation is introduced, we have enough people, who are there who can see that this would be crazy to go through with. No, we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't. I haven't seen it yet. In the 2 years that 45 has been in office, I haven't seen the people yet that are supposedly there with good sense stand up to what he is doing. I haven't seen it. Have you seen it? If you've seen it, please email me and correct me because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the people who are there call for his impeachment. I haven't seen the people who are there invoke the 25th clause, the 25th Amendment clause to check this man's sanity. I have not seen it. So don't tell me that I need to rely on who's currently there to make sure that this doesn't go forth. Hello. Thank you, Pastor Robert. Look at what just got onto the Supreme Court. Look what just was confirmed to the Supreme Court. And you're trying to tell me that the people that are there are going to have our best interests at heart? That's what you're trying to convince me of? Because I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Oh, and last news, Kanye West finally comes to his senses and says, I realize I've been used as a pawn. Really? Really? You realize it now? after you've already been used. Oh, you realize it now that you probably got your check. Oh, now you realize it, huh? You realize it. Really? Listen, all of this in 1 week. I just want to know, is anybody out here praying for America? And I don't mean praying for the landmass. I mean praying for the inhabitants of America. Those of you who are watching all over the world, those of you who join me on this broadcast all over the world, we are soliciting your prayers for a country gone off of its hinges. Maybe you haven't heard about any of the things that I've just shared. But if you're in another country and you have your sights set on coming to America and living in America, let me just forewarn you that if you are not of European descent, you might want to reconsider your plans. You might want to reconsider your plans. One more time, you might want to reconsider your plans. Because I can tell you like this, there are many people who are people of color, who are Black Americans, who are planning to make an exit from America. At some point, you have to recognize when you're on the Titanic. Yeah. So, if America does not course correct, and it's highly doubtful that we're going to course correct very much. We're trying to course correct by November 6th with the midterms, by getting some more people in office that have not lost their minds, who are not undercover white supremacists and are trying to turn our nation into a fascist nation. If America does not course correct, she is going to hit the iceberg called judgment. You can quote me on that. If America does not course correct, she is going to hit the iceberg called judgment. And it's not going to be pretty. Now, one thing I do know about God is that those of us who have been warning people to course correct, that God will preserve us. Go read the book of Lamentations if you don't believe it. Jeremiah warned the people. The people didn't listen. And guess what happened? Just as sure as Jeremiah warned them, they were carried off into captivity. They were destroyed. Their cities burned down. But guess who was still standing and living to tell it? Jeremiah. Guess who God took care of in the midst of all of that stuff that was happening? People were killing each other. People were cannibalizing their children. It was horrible. But guess who God kept and preserved during that whole thing? Jeremiah. This is why Jeremiah could say, his mercies are renewed day by day. Jeremiah was experiencing the mercy of God because when the judgment of God hit, because Jeremiah had been faithful to obey and carry out what God told him to do, and that was to warn the disobedient people. It was not his job to go chase people to make sure they were obedient. It was not his job to force people to obey God. It was not his job to force people to return to the word of the Lord. It was not his job to force people to love God. His job was to warn the people of what was coming, and they had the choice as to whether or not they were going to change and repent and turn or keep going in the same direction. They chose to keep going in the same direction, and so judgment came. They were invaded. They were taken captive, held as slaves. In Lamentations, it talks about how they left the poor people behind. Yeah, they left the poor people behind because they was like, we don't really have any value for them. They poor. So the poor people were, in a sense, actually spared from the judgment that hit. And Jeremiah was taken into captivity, and then he was brought back where he lived with the poor people that had been abandoned to just, you're on your own. And as he was abandoned, he began to record what was happening to the people. And this is where people take that nice little sliver from Lamentations 3 about how God's mercies are renewed every morning. But you got to read the whole book of Lamentations to understand the importance of that one statement. And the importance of that one statement was, God, I see the devastation. I see the tragedy. I see the horror that has taken place around me. I see people desperately doing things that they never would have done in their entire life. But the tragedy of the circumstances has left people so desperate that they're willing to do anything to survive. And in the midst of that, great is your faithfulness. In the midst of that, your mercies are renewed for me every morning, day by day. And so one encouragement that we can have if you are a prophet of God, one encouragement you can have if you are someone who loves God, someone who is obeying God, someone who is following God, someone who is doing exactly what God told you to do, one assurance and hope that you can have is that you will be preserved in the time to come. Now, if God tells you to leave and get out, hint, hint the movie, if God tells you to leave and get out, then you need to do that. If God tells you to stay and he's going to preserve you, then you stay and watch God preserve you. But again, that takes knowing who God is, and that takes hearing the voice of God, and then that takes obeying the voice that you hear. So, some people have already been told they need to leave America because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And some of them are hemming and hawing and saying, I don't want to go. And some of them have said, I have heard the Lord tell me to leave this country and I am gone. Bye-bye. So you just make sure you hear the Lord and you know what you're supposed to do, because the reality is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Why do we know this? Because we have a whole bunch of unrepentant, prideful, arrogant people in America who thinks that the Lord does not see them. And so they're going to keep doing stuff thinking that the Lord doesn't see them. And when judgment hits, it's going to hit. All right? So, if God is telling you to come to America, more than likely he's telling you to come to America probably to do missions. Because there's a lot of people in America who think they know the Lord and they don't know him. So if he's telling you to come to America, he's probably telling you to come to America to come witness to the pagans called Americans. Yeah. Sitting in churches, by the way, who think that God is just winking at the evil that's being committed while they say that number 45 is called of God. Called of God to do what? Called of God to expose our sins? Possibly. Called of God to show us the errors of our ways? Definitely. Called of God to show how men idolize men? Definitely. Called of God to expose that people are worshiping their politics and not the one true God? Definitely. So what is it that he's called to do? He's not our Savior. He's not holy. If you're calling anything that he's doing holy, you're not reading the scriptures. God used lots of people who were not his. Go read your Bible. Oh, he used them. He used them. But that does not mean that they were his. All right. For our last 10 minutes, we're going to jump right into the cross and the lynching tree. And we're looking at Martin Luther King Jr. And this chapter is talking about something that still hasn't been accomplished, his struggle to redeem the soul of America. And I'm going to read a little bit about Martin's philosophy on that. And then we're going to close. Although Martin Luther King Jr. was strongly influenced by Reinhold Niebuhr, he had a different take on love and justice. Had this lady come to our church passing out flyers trying to sway voters for governor and mayor. Based on Christian stances, yeah. Select Christian stances, Pastor Prophet Jonathan. Select ones. Let's be clear. Neither platform is more Christian than the other. Yeah. So I've told people when it comes to that, read the stances of the candidates, read their plans, read what they think about certain issues in your community. Yes. Of course, they're going to exclude how DeSantis is backed by racists, but not only that, but he says racist things. He has spoken for white supremacist organizations. Florida doesn't need that because he would not be a person for all people. He's already expressed how he feels about people of African descent. Good morning, Lady Judy. So, yeah. Martin Luther King. Although Martin Luther King Jr. was strongly influenced by Reinhold Niebuhr, he had a different take on love and justice because he spoke to and for powerless people whose faith focused on the cross of Jesus, mysteriously empowered them to fight against impossible odds. This was not a mysterious empowerment, by the way. This was by the power of the Holy Spirit. Just wanted to tweak that statement a little bit. In contrast to Niebuhr, King never spoke about proximate justice or about what was practically possible to achieve. That would have killed the revolutionary spirit of the African American community. Instead, King focused on the often achieved, what Niebuhr said was impossible. What do you want? King would call out before a demonstration. Freedom, the demonstrators would shout back, ready to face angry white mobs and policemen. When do you want it? King would ask, his voice reaching a crescendo. Now, was the resounding response, as the protesters would begin walking and singing together as Judah is known to do. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now, was the persistent cry for freedom among people who had never known it. You got to understand, the generations before ours had never known full freedom. Now we have a generation, I believe my generation, the generation born in the 70s, would have really been the first generation to experience complete freedom from Jim Crow. 68 present would have been the first generation born to experience freedom from Jim Crow, freedom from slavery, freedom from peonage. And so we can't look at the previous generations and berate them without understanding that the freedom that our generations enjoy now, even though we're still harassed, but we enjoy a measure of freedom that the previous generations did not enjoy. We need to understand that, we need to honor that, and we need to appreciate it. So, this was a persistent cry for freedom among people who had not yet known what it was like to be fully free in America. From 1619 to 1968. I want you to do the calculations on that. Versus a people who had always been free because they had always been either the oppressors or the ancestors of the oppressors. And I got some news for people who think that the ancestors of the oppressors are never going to experience oppression. There are some people who think that white people are never going to experience oppression. I'm here to tell you, mark my words, that if America does not course correct, white people in some way, shape, or form are going to experience oppression. Because for some of them, that's going to be the only way they get it. That's going to be the only way they understand that what their ancestors have done and how horrific it was. And I don't think it's going to be this country that oppresses them. But they better hope and pray that China and Russia does not invade the United States. Because I can tell you right now, China and Russia is not coming for people of color. I can tell you that. They're not. They're going to come for the people that deem themselves as superior. So I'm encouraging white America, y'all need to start repenting. You need to start repenting because reaping time is around the corner. Okay. They said, I am tired of fighting for something that should have been mine at birth, King often said. That kind of language created a revolutionary spirit that sent people into the streets, prepared to shoulder the cross, ready to meet whatever fate at the hands of mobs or the police. There was no talk about proximate justice, that little bit of justice that whites dole out to black people when they get ready. Listen, there is a justice coming that is not going to be doled out when people get ready to give it. God's justice called for black people to bear witness to freedom now, even unto death. That was why Fred Shuttlesworth, the movement's most courageous freedom fighter, said, you have to be prepared to die before you can begin to live. This justice language was defined by a love of freedom derived directly from Jesus's cross. Not from entitlement, not from your latest rapper telling you to go do something. No, they derived their understanding of freedom from the freedom that the cross provided to the believer. So when someone says, what made the power behind their protest? What was the power behind the protests of the 60s? The power behind the protests of the 60s was the power of the cross. Not some cute phraseology. It was more than a hashtag. It was the power of the cross that drove them. You know, that same cross that people are now trying to convince black Americans to give up. You know, that same power that people are trying to tell you belongs to the white man and that is your white man's God. No, 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 no. If you understand where the cross came from and you understand who Christ is, you understand it's not your oppressor's power. But if I can convince you that it is, and you put down the cross because you think it was given to you by your oppressor, then I just very craftily and very cunningly got you to relinquish the power that you actually had. Because I convinced you that your power came from your oppressor's God, when if you just did some study, you would know that your power did not come from your oppressor. Your power came from your homeland. So their freedom derived, and their love of freedom derived directly from Jesus's cross, and it led more than 40 martyrs to their deaths in the civil rights movement. People were willing to be martyred for the freedom that you currently enjoy. This is why we honor what was done in the civil rights movement. This is why we continue to press on for freedom. This is why we continue to say, until everybody is free, nobody is really free. This is why we continue to say, for God I live and for God I will die. This is why we continue to say that if it affects Black America and it is ignored, understand that your marginalized group is not safe. If you ignore what is happening to Black Americans, understand that you're not safe either. Because if they will do something to Black America, your group is next. Because according to the laws, according to the amendments, everybody else, every other marginalized group's freedoms rest upon the freedoms that were given to the descendants of the enslaved. So when someone talks about bothering and messing with and altering the 14th Amendment, they're not just coming against birthright citizenship, they're also coming against how Black people are classified in this country. They're also coming against all of the protections that came as a result of the 14th Amendment. That means protections for the elderly, protections for women, protections for people of different sexual orientations. They're coming for all of those protections because those protections came out of the initial protections of the 14th Amendment. So we must understand that. So when you see things happening to Black Americans in their community and you say nothing and you're silent because you say, well, that's not my community, all you're doing is setting yourself up to be next. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope I have said something today that will get you thinking. I hope that you will take a look at some of the news that we've talked about, from the Proud Boys to the Ferguson activist, her son being lynched, to the Pittsburgh shooting, to the issue with the bombing of the packages, and stay abreast of what is happening. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. I want you to have a great and wonderful day. If you are a part of my writing and speaking seminar, I will be in there in a few minutes, so you'll be hearing from me shortly. All right. Thank you again, and have a great day.